Welcome, Jason, to the Mango Languages podcast.
Thank you.
You're our first in-person interview guest, so I hope
All right.
how does that make you feel?
Makes me feel special.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So to start off, can you please tell us a bit about yourself? Like, how many languages do you speak?
Well, where do you want me to start?
When was the first language you learned?
English.
English?
Yeah. Learned that from the womb. But the second language that I learned was Hebrew.
Okay.
I heard it in my environment a lot, and I have a lot of relatives from Israel, and my dad spoke it. He didn't speak it to me directly all the time as a kid, but I always heard it in my environment, and I went to a school growing up where I learned it.
So you were exposed to that language from a young age?
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Do you think that that age plays a role in language learning?
Possibly. I believe for sure that in language acquisition it plays a role. So we know that children that are exposed to and are spoken to in many different languages as they're very young, they just naturally acquire it the same way we acquired our first languages. Learning it as a kid or being exposed to it as a kid probably did help a lot for me. But I also went to school and I learned it formally growing up, and I think that helped as well.
So you learned Hebrew in school as well as
Yeah, starting from kindergarten.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, actually maybe even before that. Yeah. So I was exposed to it and I learned it formally since kindergarten. Yeah.
When did you so you're a avid language learner, right?
Yeah.
When did you first kind of feel that you were in love with languages? Was it like an epiphany or a gradual realization?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have a few memories that maybe probably help piece the story together for me. So one of them dates back to third grade. One of my close friends at the time was Russian, and I just remember going to his house and being at the table eating dinner with his parents and with him, and they were talking in Russian. And I was obviously aware that they're speaking another language, but I was just mesmerized. I looked at my friend like he was a magician. He was able to, because his parents didn't speak English, so they were able to speak to him in Russian. They were directing a question at me. They're looking at me speaking in a language I didn't understand, and he was telling me what they were saying. And I was telling him in English the response, and he was telling it back to them in Russian, and I was in such awe of the magical powers that he had. And I remember pulling books off his shelf, and it was in the Russian script. And I would say, "Can you read this?" And he'd say, "Yeah," and he'd start reading it. And I said, "It's amazing!" Like I felt like he was performing magic before my eyes. Now, of course, I was exposed to another language at the time. I had known Hebrew. I was in third grade, so whatever a third grade level was, I could read it. But Russian was something new. And I remember we were on a field trip on the bus, and I said, I didn't know how to learn. I didn't know any pedagogy or any methodology of learning. I had no Mango languages. I had no language learning tools to use. So I made up a system which I said, okay, we're going to just look out the window on this field trip, and on everything we see, I'm going to write it down in English, and you're going to tell me how to say it in Russian. And to this day, I don't know why. There's a few words that stick in my mind. I remember we passed by a truck. I pointed to a truck, and he said it's gruzavik, and I remember to this day since third grade. So I don't know if I identified that I loved it at the time. It was more, it was just mesmerizing to me. Actually, now another memory just came back too. I lived, some of my friends on my block were Vietnamese, and they could do the same magic, right? And I think this was even before third grade, and I was amazed at how do these kids, they're my age, they're a little bit younger, a little bit older, and they can just, no problem, go back and forth, Vietnamese to English, English to Vietnamese, but I can't do it, and their parents can't do it, and their grandparents can't do it, and they were the link to link us, the neighbors, with the rest of their family. To me, it was just something that was mesmerizing and fascinating. So I guess probably very early on, I I had, I guess you could say, a fascination with language, or with, I'll use the word linguists loosely, meaning, not the scientific linguists, but people that seem to be multilingual or polyglots, if you will. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have like dreams of being fluent in a language, or do you kind of like want to expose yourself to as many languages as possible?
So I'll tell you a secret, since I've got this exclusive Mango interview now. The reason for all of Mango languages existing for me was I had such a dream to become fluent in a language. And I remember using other products early on before Mango was started, and I thought to myself, with a lot of enthusiasm actually, I found one product, I'm not going to mention any names, but it had many languages that you could learn from it. And I was so excited. I thought, this is it. This is going to be my product. I'm going to spend every second I can using this product. And I spent a little time with it, and I felt like this is ineffective. It can't work. And I was so deflated and dispirited about my experience with it. And I said, there's got to be some way to achieve this goal of becoming fluent in all these languages. And so kind of the hope and the dream of achieving that at some point is kind of the, maybe, I guess you could, for lack of a better way of phrasing it, the spiritual underpinning for Mango, for that passion and desire and longing to be able to perform the same magic that I witnessed when I was a child. Yeah.
It's really cool. I feel like that could be like a new t-shirt slogan, like the Mango Magicians.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, the Mango Magicians. Yeah.
So what did you study, like, academically or professionally in college?
So I switched majors a few times. I started out, I thought I wanted to go into hospitality business, hotel and restaurant management. I did a quick shift into finance, and then I only had a short stint in finance. And then I switched to computer engineering, and then that's where I finished my degree, was in computer engineering. Yeah. Much later, I started doing master's in, it's called the Masters of Arts in Language Learning. So it's the study of second language acquisition, essentially, and methodologies. It was primarily a program designed for language teachers, but to give a much higher level theoretical foundation in what's actually happening during the language acquisition process in adults, primarily.
Was that like while you were kind of starting Mango that you did that?
No, actually, it was early on in the Mango days. Yeah, it was late enough into the development of Mango that I knew it wasn't necessary. It was just more to satisfy a curiosity more than anything. And what I learned, I was so excited to join this program. And there's a lot that I learned from it, don't get me wrong. And if it wasn't for that program, I wouldn't have met Kimberly, who's one of our senior linguists here at Mango. So, but one of the things I learned is that the science is still being developed, and that a lot of the questions that I had walking into the program only multiplied, because there's not a lot of hard answers. There's answers, but I had a lot more questions than answers exist. Yeah.
Do you feel that well, you did study languages academically, but in your undergraduate and the things you studied, as an undergraduate, do you think that they relate to languages? Do you think you can relate everything you learned into where you are now?
Well, computer engineering, I studied computer science, so I did learn computer languages. A computer language is obviously different from a human language, but there are some similarities. There's a certain logical process, even though language likes to break the rules here and there. By and large, there's also a system of rules, which we call grammar, right? There's a system of rules for how the language works. Same thing with software engineering, computer engineering, all the math behind it. There's a system of logic, and once you get your mind around the system of logic, then you can kind of crack the code. I think there's a lot of similarities there with language, right? To learn a grammar, you have to kind of crack the code to what's the system of logic that this language uses. And then once you do that, you realize that every once in a while likes to throw you curveballs and just to keep it interesting. But yeah.
Awesome. So what is like one of your favorite Russian words since you brought up Russian?
So I don't know a whole lot of Russian words. Maybe I know more than I think. I don't know if some of them I can say on camera, but
or phrases.
Well, my favorite phrase is pretty much the same in every language. The phrase I know that's my favorite in every language, and you'll know why in a second, is in Russian it would be "Я изучаю русский язык по замечательной программе от Mango Languages," which means I'm learning Russian from a great website called Mango Languages.
Oh, that's awesome.
So that one I've made sure, even if I can't say anything else, I've learned that one and a few others.
Oh, I've heard that in Hawaiian. Oh yeah.
Right. I have to see if I can remember in Hawaiian now. Yeah. Ika'o, ke'a'o maine yao ika'o lelo Hawaii me kakahua pa'a mai ka'iloa o Mango Languages.
That's awesome.
So, and I know a few. I mean, Hawaiian. I know a few others because it's an interesting language. There's very few letters. There's very few sounds, and it sounds interesting. So, I studied a little bit before I went to Hawaii. I could say,
cool.
Yeah,
Cool.
some basic things like aloha. It's very versatile. Peha'oi. How are you?
Oh yeah.
I never met any actual native islanders where I could. I did actually. I met a waiter who was a native islander, and he was surprised that I could even get as far as I did, and then I showed him the app, and he was like, "Oh, that's pretty cool."
Let's see, okay. Multiple choice question.
Multiple choice, got it.
So which type of language would you be interested in learning? A, any new language. B, a totally unrelated language to what you already know. C, an endangered language. D, an invented language, like Esperanto or something.
Yeah.
Or E, a language with difficult sounds.
Okay, so I'll answer your question and not be difficult because I actually thought of a sixth choice. So probably out of all those, I guess the first one is any language, right? You could, in other words, pick something out of a hat and just give it to me and I'll do it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that because I mean there's certain thing about language that I like for its own sake. But if I don't have people to practice with, ultimately, or some functional use for it, it seems like maybe not as rewarding. And it's only a practical thing, really, because there's only so many hours in a day, and it's hard enough to find, believe it or not, it's hard enough to find the right amount of time to actually devote to taking a language skill to the next level. And so as much as I would love to learn 50 languages at once, if I learned a totally endangered language with no functional purpose behind it, it'd be cool, I guess, for its own sake, just for the learning, but I don't know what I would do after that, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of languages that I actually have functional purposes for, so I probably would pick something a little more useful. It's not my main motive. I mean, I like for example, I don't even have much of a functional use for Italian, but I just love the way it feels to speak it, and I love the way it sounds, and so I guess if Italian was an endangered language, maybe I would continue with it. I don't know. Yeah. Now my sixth option, though, that I was going to tell you was I've always wanted to invent a language.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And when I was a kid, I used to do that. I used to draw up new alphabets. I used to make up words. I used to think of insane grammars that are totally illogical, where if it's a Tuesday, the word for house is this, but if it's a Wednesday, the word for house is something totally different. I don't know why I would think of such a ridiculous grammar, but I just thought it was fun to think of these ideas as a kid. So
that's really cool. What if there's like a cultural thing in your language or your culture you made where like Tuesday there was a certain just cultural reason why they would change the name of the house in order to protect their identity or something,
Yeah, it could be. Like I mean, there are weirder things. I remember when we first started Mango, I thought I knew a lot about languages back then. This was just 8 years ago, and I remember we were developing for the Asian languages, and my brother, actually, who was helping develop the course, he said, I need to know something very important. Is there any language that doesn't put a space between words? And I said, that's ridiculous. How could they not put a space between words? Of course, every language has to put a space between words. How would you know it's a word? Well, we found out right after we launched the course that, it's not true. Japanese and Chinese don't put, and there's probably other languages too, but for sure, those two languages, they don't put spaces between their words. So I asked, how do you know? How do you know where the word is? You just know. Just like in Hebrew or Arabic, there's no vowels. They don't put the vowel markings in usually adult, not adult, but I mean material text that's designed for adults, not children. And somebody might think, well, how can you read without vowels? But you just do. That's just one of the challenges that a learner has to deal with, you know, so.
Oh, wow, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Do you think language learning should be personalized, or do you think there's a general recipe that anyone could follow?
Yep. I think both. So I think there are certain principles that work well across the board. But that being said, every person is different. Every person has different motivations. Every person has different talents and interests. And so it's necessary for each person to have a somewhat tailored experience, but it has to be cut from the right cloth, so to speak. Yeah. So it's better to start with a template of things that are generally known to work. Better language learners oftentimes have just, for whatever reason, subconsciously come up with a methodology that just works better. And so if you took an excellent language learner's methodology and gave it to a mediocre language learner, that mediocre language learner could become an excellent language learner because they're empowered with a methodology that somehow the excellent language learner intuitively figured out. Either they consciously thought through a system, or necessity dictated that they kind of in an ad hoc way created such a system. But you give that same system to an average learner, and they can become excellent. So, and I think, okay, so that learner can tweak it a little bit to adjust to his or her own style, but I think that it has to be customized a little bit, but start with a good framework. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Definitely. What is the best advice you could give for surpassing the intermediate plateau?
Surpassing the intermediate plateau? I wish I knew. I feel like that's where I hover.
Okay.
Yeah. But the truth is, no. I mean, no. In reality, I've with some languages I've gone into the advanced levels in certain skills, and it's, for me personally, it's about consistent usage. So I know when I'm in the country, for example, and I'm just constantly using it all the time. It's not just an hour or two of study in a particular day or week, but it's just constant. For me, that's the way that it just transports me to the next level with the language, because you just can't survive without it at some point, right? It's the people you're hanging out with, the things that you're doing, everything is, the language is not a nice, interesting side project. It's your life. And when it becomes your life, then you can't help it, but the brain is naturally going to respond to that kind of, I don't say stress in a negative way, I mean in a positive way, but your brain is just going to naturally respond to such stress, and it's going to expand its abilities. So probably the best way is, once you have a good foundation, is to just be living it. Yeah, I mean, and there's a lot of things we can do to simulate it. One of the things that there's jokes about polyglots like messing up their computers and phones, but there's things you can do in your daily life to simulate living it. So, for example, I haven't done this in a while, but I probably should do it now. In fact, after this conversation, I'm going to do it to my phone. I set everything to another language. So at one point I was trying to focus on my Portuguese, and I set everything on my email and calendar and everything, all the settings were all in Portuguese. On my phone, everything, the whole operating system in Portuguese. to the point where even Siri, like now you can talk to Siri,
Whoa.
and you can talk to Siri, speaks like 20 different languages with a few different dialects, and so you can even have conversations with Siri in a different language. So, and then it's the people that you interact with. Here at Mango, we're lucky because we have a lot of options if we want to get into a conversation in many different languages. We have that opportunity. Reading is a great one, right? So take an art, you're interested in sports or technology or finance or anything, cooking or whatever it is, there's articles in the language that you're learning that you can read. Nice thing is, we're coming out very shortly, we're going to come out with our beta of Mango Reader to help people that are at that intermediate level to get to the next level by reading. Because when you read, you're just putting a lot of language into your mind, and we give some tools to help bridge the gap to what you don't know. And it's very nice. It connects in with our vocab system, so as soon as you come across a word you've never seen before, you can instantly get the meaning for it, you can instantly add it to your vocab system, and you can really take your skill to the next level. So reading is another great way. Movies, it's a fun way. It could be movies, it could be TV, and that's why we have a product called Mango Premiere, where the whole point of it is you watch film that was designed for the speakers of that language, and you enjoy watching the movie, you learn the slang, the culture, everything, and you learn the language. And so we give you tools. So if somebody's at a low intermediate level, they're going to need more help than somebody at a higher intermediate level. But whatever level they're at, those tools are provided to help bridge the gap and cross, what did you call it, the intermediate divide?
Plateau, yeah.
The intermediate plateau. Again, but it's all about, what it all comes down to is exposure, exposure, exposure to the language. Because we know, one of the things I did learn is that at the end of the day, the brain is a very powerful instrument, right? It's a very powerful processing machine, and if you give it enough language, Krashen called it comprehensible input. If you give it enough comprehensible input, your brain will naturally process the language and acquire it naturally. So the idea of learning it, the idea is more about acquiring it, allowing your brain to acquire it, allowing your brain to subconsciously do all the work it needs to process the language, and in order to do that, you have to give it a lot of input.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
This is some great advice. I'd actually never thought about talking to Siri. It's like a conversation partner in pocket.
We've actually talked about doing some Siri mini courses for
Really?
Mango, yeah.
Wow.
Because there's certain specific things. A lot of people don't even know the things you can say in your native language, like in English. You may not know that you can tell Siri to set the alarm for you. So you can do that. You can do it in Spanish and in Mandarin or in Russian and 15, 20 other languages. So if you're learning a language, start doing all the things you would normally do in that language. I mean, another thing, when I make a shopping list, right? So if you're learning French, make your shopping list in French. When you come across, I don't know the word for apples, well, you gotta look it up and write it down, and the next time you make your shopping list and you need to get apples, you're gonna remember how to say it in French. Anything you would do in your native language, do it in the language you're learning. It's a little bit harder, it takes a little bit more work, but
Yeah.
the reward is great. It's a great reward. Your life will become enriched in a way that it could never be otherwise. And that's why we do what we do.
How have languages enhanced your life experience?
How have languages enhanced my life experience? So, right, in one way, that's like asking a fish, how has the water enhanced your life experience, right? it's just, right? We can't even imagine life without it, right? I'm obviously you must be talking about a new language, a foreign language, yeah?
Yeah. Not just like language itself. Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah,
learning.
I know.
How has learning foreign languages enhanced your life?
I know. I was giving you a hard time. But in a way, it's true. So for me, the water that, let's use the fish in the water analogy, for example. The water that if I only know one language, the water that I can swim in is a small pond, maybe a bigger pond, but if I know another language, I can jump into that second pond and I can swim around with new fish, a new school of fish, and I can hang out with a whole new group, and they got other cool things to do and other cool things to see. There's for me, there's like so many dimensions of how it's enriched my life personally. One is from friendships that I've made with people from other parts of the world, and then there's also kind of just so that's more of an interpersonal. It's learning about their culture, experiencing life from their point of view, interacting with them on their terms and their language, and I've had great experiences doing that. Then there's also like an intrapersonal experience, meaning the experience that I have contained within myself. For me, there's certain things that I just really enjoy about language in general and certain languages in particular. So, for example, I mentioned Italian before, right? But there's something about speaking Italian, and even Sicilian, because I learned Sicilian a little bit. It's quite rusty now, but those languages, the Italian language and the Italian dialects, there's something about them that I just love. The rhythm, the cadence, the prosody of those languages, just the sound vibrations feel good for me when I speak them. So I enjoy speaking those languages, and I enjoy hearing them. Even just conversational Italian, it's very musical to my ears. Same thing when I heard Brazilian Portuguese for the first time. I was just hypnotized by the sound of that language. I was listening to probably the most boring, dry newscast, but I was blown away by the unique quality of the different sounds in the Brazilian Portuguese language. And so for me, it was more of almost like a musical quality, just listening to this unique and interesting language. So I guess a lot of times I get attracted to the sound of a language. Finnish, for example. I don't know why I started messing around with Finnish on the Mango course, and I thought it was so interesting. There's a couple of unique things I noticed about it. They have the double consonants. So I'll give you an example of how something in Finnish sounds. So that same sentence I talked about, right? My accent is probably not perfect, but I'm sure I'd be understood. Opettelen suomea yhtälä tosi hyvällä verkkosivulla, se nimi on Mango Languages. It just has this, it's totally different. It's than Italian or Spanish or French or Chinese. And it just, when I heard it for the first time, I was, wow, that is so interesting, you know. So, and then I got to the point where I was just saying it whenever I'd see, oh, hauska tavata, you know, just say things in Finnish, just because it sounded interesting. So I think probably the sound of the language is something that attracts me as well. Another way that it's enriched my life is maybe not the long-term friendships and relationships, but even those little moments in time with another human being that could last seconds or minutes. Well, my favorite phrase is pretty much the same in every language, which is "Ja is cut." I don't care. This will be the outtake.